In 1869, the Gradual Enfranchisement Act was created by the federal government, which established the elective band council system that is still to this day in the Indian Act. This is the Gradual Enfranchisement Act by me. Sorry if I say some words wrong. Enfranchisement, in simple terms, is getting rid of someone's status as Native Indigenous and giving them the status of becoming a Canadian citizen. Meanwhile, enfranchisement played a major role in the Canadian federal government assimilation policy. The word enfranchisement comes from an old French word, en meaning make or put it, and franchisement meaning set or make free. Later, enfranchisement led to be something that came to a vote. For example, an African American would be enfranchised if they married a non-African American, or if their husband died or abandoned them. In 1867, colonies of New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Ontario, Quebec, and the federal government of Canada were granted responsibilities over First Nations under the British North American Act. In 1867, colonies of New Brunswick, Ontario, Nova Scotia, Quebec, and the federal officials of Canada were granted responsibilities over the First Nations under the British North American Act, passed the same year. This is because the federal officials did not believe that they could make their own decisions in public. While Enfranchisement Act was passed 2 years after the British North American Act, the Enfranchisement Act was official in 1969 and fully ending in 1985, 16 years after being passed. And taking enfranchisement into account, as said, it tries to take the native status away and give them a Canadian status. That's exactly what they were going for, and that's what they did. The act was a failure in many years, but gradually increased in short years, leading to the word Indian, later becoming the Indian Act 3 years after. While Canada was a major part involved in the act, the people who made the act visible to the world were the people of the 5th Parliament of Canada, who include Sir A. Macdonald, who was Prime Minister at the time. The Liberal Party was led by Edward Blake, and the Speaker of the act was George Kirkpatrick. After it all, John A. Macdonald and Edward Blake were seen as heroes, while George Kirkpatrick was seen unenthusiastic when he was speaking during the act. During the year of the approval of the Enfranchisement Act, a lot more people than you would expect believed that the act was more of a long-term stubborn discrimination. While the act states the native will not vote, they believe by voting they would have to give up the sticking status and be assimilated. My question is, in which parliament gave the Enfranchisement Act to the public, leading to the results of the Indian Act? If you said the Congress of the Union, you would be wrong. The correct answer is the 5th Parliament. In the year 1867, the Enfranchisement Act was created, later to be passed 2 years after, and given the new meaning to Indian, which started up the Indian Act exactly 8 years after. That was my presentation. Thank you, and hope I get good marks, RC.
Just off the top, tell us why voting in some Indigenous communities in Canadian elections is considered controversial.
Well, it's controversial because many First Nations still really hold on and assert their sovereignty. The sovereignty of a people isn't to be underestimated. It needs to be asserted and promoted. But you look at in today's context where the Canadian government is actually taking care of or administering some of your affairs. So that sovereignty is not complete, in my opinion.